Where will the rookies land? That's the big question coming out of the combine. And we're going to look at our way too early 2025 fantasy football running back rankings post combine. We'll talk about some of the rookies, but also all of the position as a whole, get into our tiers. And without further ado, let's get into it. First up is Saquon Barkley. It's hard to argue with this at this point, I think. He went over 2,000 yards rushing. They sat him out the last game. He really could have set the record if they really wanted him to. And through the playoffs, he actually ended up setting the all-time rushing yard record, including the playoffs. So, I mean, he was a monster. Overall, I think it's really hard to argue with the fact that, he's going to be the top option. It's everything we could have expected from the situation in Philly, running behind the best offensive line he's ever had, and the talent just matched up perfectly. Plus, he's got a rushing quarterback to help alleviate some of the focus that would otherwise be on him. It's just the perfect situation with the perfect player and the best running back talent in the league currently. Going to go first in this first tier. Going second is Bijan Robinson, young player, year over year, improved in terms of his fantasy performance, going from 9th to 4th. He also pushed over 300 carries. I think he is everything we could have expected from a first-round player, and his targets dipped a little bit in his second year. So I think there is still improvement to be had in the passing game. Penix is a little bit of a statue, so I think we could see his receiving game even increase as well. Jahmyr Gibbs coming in third. He finished second at the position, but I will say that a lot of that production came in the last 4 games when Montgomery was out, including a monster game in Week 18. So take that with a little bit of grain of salt. I do still think, obviously, he's an excellent pick, the third player here. But with David Montgomery healthy, he definitely does not have as much upside as he otherwise would. And the last player we're going to talk about in the tier is Christian McCaffrey. So this one obviously is a fluid situation. I think as we get closer to camp, this will be solidified. If we start hearing negative reports of any sort around him, we'll probably push him down even further. But for right now, he's too good when he's on the field to not have in this tier. And you can see he's been 1, 2, or 3 when he's stayed on the field. And other than that, he's had a lot of injury issues. So he's definitely riskier than the rest of these players, in my opinion, but everybody carries injury risk. So it's not necessarily like he's going to be a bad player. So overall, you worried at all about Saquon's huge workload in that in his first year in Philly?
Yeah, I kind of am. And looking back over the last, 10 years or so, we've seen this kind of trend over and over again where these guys have these monster performances on the back of a huge workload. The next year, they're either not as efficient or they're hurt. We saw it with Todd Gurley. We saw it with CMC a couple times. We saw it with Henry from 20 to 21. We saw Jacobs' efficiency dip after the 22 monster season. So I don't know. As excited as I am to draft Saquon, and, I don't think I'm going to be pushing him up over the top wide receivers in 3 wide receiver league. But yeah, with the amount of touch, he was over 100 touches, like you said, in the playoffs too.
Yep.
So
yeah.
I don't want to pour water on him. I'm just a little bit cautious, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and we used to have this article that would come out every year from ESPN that would be like the curse of 370, right? Where it was like 370 carries or 370 touches was like the benchmark of like if a running back was going to see some sort of major decline in their performance, and Saquon was well over 400.
He got to like 482 or something.
Yeah. And so, it's one of these things where I don't know how much it's going to affect him. And honestly, to be real, he was pretty clean on a lot of those runs. So it was like, obviously he took some punishment, but I'm worried about him too. I really feel like I want to draft either the last player in this tier or I'm going to just wait at running back. That's not all that different than the suggested strategy we go in every year. Saquon does feel like a difference maker though. And the running backs were so much better than the wide receivers this past season that if you did lean into the running back depth and into the running backs early, you probably had a better team and filled in wide receiver later this past year. Now, I don't know that that's going to play necessarily early in the first round. So, we'll see how it ends up shaking out. For now, overall, I still am a little bit worried. McCaffrey, obviously, I'm super worried about that 49er offense in general. Just doesn't feel like they're as good anymore. I mean, they only won 6 games, so
Yeah.
Maybe McCaffrey coming back can help them in a major way on offense. But these four players are exceptional. You're going to get an advantage as long as they're on the field. So,
And I think real quick too, with what you said about, if we get good reports with McCaffrey going into camp, like I don't think that many of us trust Shanahan anymore. Like we kept getting all these good reports last year. We saw him pushed up to number one, like very consistently. So I don't know if I'm going to buy it at all,
Yeah, it's just really hard to know. And like, if he has any sort of injury, I'm not going to trust that he's right. Right? It's got to be that he's healthy. We want to see him in the preseason. Like, none of this. Oh, he's going to be ready, and then it's just like not at all even kind of.
If it was a playoff game, he'd be playing. Like, okay,
yeah, and it was like that was just absolutely a lie. He missed the first 8 games, 10 games. So
yeah.
Anyways, that's the first tier there. These guys are very, very good. The second tier also is very good players. I almost would prefer to get my first running back here. Starting off with Etienne. He showed he could be more of the workhorse, right? He was a huge beneficiary of the receiving game work. He became the second option of the passing game. You see it on there, right? 87 targets and 78 receptions. Scored 6 touchdowns through the air too. Obviously, his rushing numbers were good, but they weren't even close to as good as his rookie year. So maybe there's a little bit of additional untapped upside here for him going into his third season, where if he gets his rushing averages back into that 5.5, 6 range, and he kicks up his carries, 20, 30, which is like 2 a game, while maintaining this receiving work. And if Tua stays healthy, I know it's just like a bunch of ifs, what's there, but there is that pathway for him to have even higher upside here. And the 260 fantasy points last year was not close to being in the top tier. Right, there was like a 320 in half PPR, so there was like a 60-point gap from him to be in that top tier. But I think there is the upside and a pathway here for him to get into that tier of over 300 points. So, that's why I have him kicking off this A tier. I think he has the most upside. Going to the second player, it's a rookie, Ashton Jeanty. Doesn't need a ton of introduction here. Coming out of Boise State, he should be an early first-round pick. I'm kind of expecting him to go to the Bears. So, I think that the offense could be way better. Ben Johnson obviously wants to get the running game established. And if he's the running back in the Ben Johnson system, that's somebody that you want to be drafting extremely high. So I just think overall that this spot is a perfect place to put him for his upside. I know these next 2 guys have been super stable and super productive. So I understand if you want to push him down a little bit. But the next guy is Derrick Henry, right? And like I said, super productive, super consistent. You just see all the green all over his rushing and position ranks year over year. In the best rushing attack that he's been in his whole career. I know he's older, but he just is coming off of 16 touchdowns. It's just so nice to just throw him in there and just know you're getting a touchdown every week. Maybe not every time, but you see he's in that group with that 320 that I mentioned with Etienne. So like I said, Etienne has the upside to get there, and Derrick Henry just did it. So I don't know that I'm being all that fair in the ranking, and maybe I should push Henry up, but there are still the age concerns and possible injury risk and the complete lack of receiving game that kind of leaves his floor a little bit exposed. But overall, Henry is a great pick. I'd love to get him in this area as my first running back. And the last guy in this tier is Kyren Williams. Ever since taking over the role, he's done nothing but produce. He's been very productive, 15 plus touchdowns in back-to-back seasons and over 1,100 yards both years on the ground, and enough work in the passing game to kind of elevate his floor a little bit. So that's the wrap up of the A tier there.
A couple things to touch on. First with Etienne, I've heard people kind of poo-poo him a little bit this year, and I just think that it's a little bit unfair just because when Tua was out, that whole offense was just complete garbage. Like, yeah, he got a lot of touches and carries and things like that, but defenses were just stacked in the box and they couldn't do anything. So I am excited to see what he can do. And it did feel like he's still in games with Tua left some to be desired in terms of like big explosive runs. Like year one, it was like a highlight tape. We saw a bunch of those, games where he went off. I still think he didn't necessarily have as many of those as I would come to expect. So he's someone I'm definitely going to be targeting. And with Jeanty, yeah, I don't think he makes it out of the top 10. I think Raiders are an option. And I also am starting to think that maybe the Patriots might make some sense. Like if you're looking at a draft with two blue chips in terms of Hunter and Abdul Carter, and then maybe you want to put Jeanty in that regard. And then the other team that needs a quarterback, they're sitting there at 4, and they're like, I don't know if I necessarily want to go offensive line. We just brought in, what's his name from New York Jets. So I could see him being a potential option there as well, which I think, maybe we'll get to Ramondre at some point, would be a good fit as well. But excited for him. I'm not sure I can put him above Henry right now just because Henry's so awesome, but we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, I mean, Henry's coming off a 1,918 touchdown season. Hard to argue with you there if you want to have a Henry higher. It's just,
I know.
One of those things where it's just age is eventually going to get him. So which year are you going to end up holding the bag there? So
yeah, fair.
Which maybe that never happens, and he just is super productive until he decides to ride off into the sunset. If you're going to bet on one player to do it, it's him. So all right, getting down into the B tier now. Here we have a laundry list of players here in B and in C. So again, B though is the tier that I'm comfortable still getting my running back 1. And I'm probably not going to get a player in this tier if I went with somebody in S or A tier. I'm probably just going to wait until C tier because there's so many names that go so far down. And in a 3 wide receiver or a 3 wide receiver superflex league, you just have so many spots that you need to fill. And I feel like running back, you can still get production out of that second spot. If somebody gets injured and you are successful on the waiver wire at picking up one of the injury replacements, you can plug them straight into that spot. That's usually the spot I like to play with. So the first guy in this B tier is Josh Jacobs. Again, another guy I would have no problem whatsoever being my number 1. The offense ran completely through him in Green Bay, and I think that's going to just continue into next year. 15 touchdowns, 1330. He was great. Enough passing game work to warrant being the number 9 player on the top of this tier. Second guy is Jonathan Taylor. I obviously don't like Jonathan Taylor as much as a lot of people, so that's just my preference. Again, it's one of those things where he played 14 games and was still running back 9, and then I'd turn around and play him at running back 10. The quarterback situation was very tumultuous too, which hopefully will be a little bit more even keel throughout the next year, and if he does play a full season, it's almost guaranteed he's going to finish above this. It's just the receiving game work I'm not confident in, and the injury history. You can see, he was dealing with the ankle in 2022 and 2023. But, he has all the talent in the world, so he can easily finish above this. Next guy we have here is James Cook. I personally feel like I should just push Cook ahead of Jonathan Taylor because I do like Cook more. He's got a little bit more receiving game base, and he's playing on a much better, more consistent offense. So you see, he didn't even have a ton of carries this past year, only 207, but over 1,000 yards, and he finally broke through on the touchdowns. I don't think anybody really expected him to have this level of scoring in him. I mean, 18 touchdowns is a major breakthrough. And so if he does get more work, I know they worked in Ray Davis, and I know that he missed a game due to injury, but I think that there could be even more upside here. I mean, if he pushes 1,500 yards on the ground, gets 250 carries, another guy that could push into that A tier that I really like as a kind of foundational piece at running back if you can get him. So overall, really like James Cook. Next guy is a fan favorite, Bucky Irving. So, I'm sure there are people wondering why he's so low. I've seen him easily in people's top 10s, up at 7 even. And I get it because he was 14 last year. He didn't really take on a full-time workload until, a few weeks into the season. He was added most everywhere, but he really kind of took over the second half, and he was very productive on the ground. My reservation is I know he was good through the air too, but he still is going to be contending with Rashad White in that role, who was the touchdown scorer in the air. So, I mean, if he completely takes that role and is just going to be the bell cow and gets 70% snap share, I'm going to be wrong on this. But, his snap shares was still down in the 40%. And unless that increases in a major way, I don't see his upside path as clearly as some of these other guys. Going to the next guy is Joe Mixon. This is the We Don't Like Joe Mixon podcast. So he burned us last year. He was very good. He did miss 3 games, and then he was not good against the very difficult competition he faced in the fantasy playoffs. So if you had him, he likely got you there, but you didn't win. As I say that, the guy who had Mixon in our league ended up winning the league. So maybe it wasn't super important if you got him later in your drafts, but overall, he's just a high volume, very steady and productive player. He can score touchdowns, he can catch passes. So hard to deny just him as a solid pick. I would not want him personally as my number one running back. So maybe there is like this mini tier here within B. But overall, I'm sure there are people out there that wouldn't mind having him to anchor their running backs if they waited multiple rounds to fill that first slot. Next guy is Breece Hall. Obviously, he was S tier last year, and we had him pushed up in like 1, 2, or 3, and it was probably a mistake. I should have known better. I said at the end of the year before, like I'm putting Breece Hall at 10. I'm not moving him. And then like all the consensus rankings came out and it was like 2. And I was like, oh, dude, like it was like first round pick. But my issue is he had so many games where he only had 50 rushing yards. And I'm like, he's not creating on his own, and he doesn't rack up a ton of rushing yards really. And I always took issue with that. And I just thought his floor was really low because of it. And it kind of played out that way. I mean, he was running back 17 on the back of a lot of passing game work again, but I don't know. I hope that they are able to run better with Justin Fields at the controls. So maybe that's a little bit of a silver lining, but I don't have any problem burying him here. If people have him ranked much higher, go for it. I'm probably going to end up with no Breece Hall again this year, just like I didn't last year. If he gets pushed up, say, a whole tier here, because I clearly have a lot of guys, even somebody like Mixon, who I don't really like, ahead of him. So that's kind of where I'm at with Breece Hall. And then 2 more guys in this tier. First one, Amarion Hampton. He's a rookie. For those of you who don't know, he's coming out of North Carolina, and I do expect him to get first-round capital as well. He tested really well at the Combine. I was very excited to see that. So not a lot of analysis here until we know which team he's on and what sort of situation he's going to be running in. And then the last guy in this tier is Old Faithful Alvin Kamara. So I have a soft spot for Kamara. He was my running back 1 last year, and he was great for me. Obviously didn't quite get to that 1,000-yard rushing season because he missed 3 games. Unfortunately, I was really hoping he was going to play in that last game, get 50 yards and maybe sub out. But you just know that you're going to have this insane floor in the receiving game, right? He didn't score a touchdown for like 12 straight weeks, and it didn't really matter because he was putting up double-digit performances because of his pass catching. And, basically anything you get on the ground is icing from him. So I really just like to have that stability when I'm choosing somebody that could be a running back 1, right? Or, low-end running back 1. And so I feel pretty good about Kamara. I might even move him over Mixon. And Hampton's still a wild card, but I feel pretty good about this tier overall.
Yeah. And I love Kamara. We did a video on the top guys that were drafting in pre-draft best ball, and Kamara was on that list. But one guy I guess I wanted to pick the conversation up with you about was Bucky Irving. So I'm tending to agree with where you have him. I looked at Fantasy Pros, and they had him at like RB8 in half PPR.
Yeah, dude,
and it just
everybody
feels,
loves him.
yeah, and it sucks because I love Bucky, but I feel like I have to hate on him because I don't love him that much, and I have to find excuses to not draft him maybe. But just for me, like you said with Rachaad White, it's like I think Bucky's highest snap percentage, other than the week that White was out, was like 56% or something like that. And he doesn't really profile. Yeah. And he doesn't really profile as a workhorse. And we know White is a great pass catcher. We know White still gets work on the goal line. I don't know. And then they're also losing Liam Coen, who orchestrated this, Renaissance running attack when it wasn't good the years prior. So there's just a few things kind of working against him there, where I'm also not a Mixon guy, surprise, surprise, but it's like, at least I know he's going to be the workhorse, right?
Yeah, fully agree.
Yeah. And then I guess where other people are drafting him at RB8, it's like, I just can't take him over Jacobs or Taylor. I'm higher on Taylor than you are, but like either way, like, man.
It's like the other thing about him that you got to remember is like, I don't know, day 3 running backs always worry. right? It's like you gotta be. I know he did
Yeah.
really well. I know he was super productive. I know that he's a cult fan favorite now, right? I get all of that, but like I still feel like at 12 I have him very aggressively ranked. And there's just the potential that he doesn't have the level of efficiency that we saw last year. And like even Achane's efficiency, which was like historic, fell off a lot. But he stepped up into a big volume. But if Bucky's not going to step into that huge volume in 70% snap shares, then he's not going to pay off at running back 8. I just don't think.
Yeah, and I don't know if I take as much stock into draft stock as you do, but at the same time, it's like for people that are looking for comparisons of like Gibbs year 1 to Gibbs year 2, like Gibbs was top 10, ran a 4.24, and so Gibbs has that like breakaway big play potential every time he touches the ball. Not that Bucky can't make big plays, but like as a 4.55 guy, like he doesn't necessarily get away with the lower volume in a sense and still be like a top 5 type guy. So there's just too many things that are kind of scaring me away from him, which is unfortunate because I really like him.
Yeah, and there, you say that you're not looking big into draft stock. And the reason I do is you look at these guys that are currently on the board here. There was one player that was, other than Bucky, one that was a day 3 pick, and that was Kyren. And we're still, even still, there are people hating on Kyren, saying, 5th round pick. When is that? When is the floor going to drop out? Right? If McVay left tomorrow, Kyren's not a starter. So that's why I say it, and that's why I put that into my evaluation, is because it seems to matter in terms of how likely these guys are to hit and how likely they are to get the opportunities. And obviously once you get a second contract, that kind of goes out the window. But again, a lot of these guys are either big time players and on their second contracts or early picks. So even a guy like James Cook, who wasn't necessarily sure if he was going to be able to handle like a big rushing workload, he was a second round pick. So anyways, that's why I bring it up with Bucky, is he was a 4th rounder. So it's like that's carries a different connotation than somebody who's picked in the 1st round or second. Going into next players here into C. So we've got another 8 players in this tier. So we're going to kick it off with Ken Walker. You see his stats here. It just feels like he's been better, but I'm not sure if we can really say he's not injury prone anymore. He's missed time at all 3 of his seasons, and his backup, Zach Charbonnet, has been very productive when he's been out. So I don't know. He's an interesting one where, like, when he's on the field and when he gets 6 targets in a game, it's like, oh my God, like why did we let him slip so far in the draft? And then, he gets hurt and then he comes back and has 10 carries for 40 yards and 1 catch. And we're like, oh, maybe that's why. So like, he's like such an enigma to me. I just wish that he would stay healthy and keep the job and get 4 targets a game. And then we could push him up a tier or 2, because he is one of the most explosive players on the ground with the ball in his hands. So, I really like Ken Walker as a player. I just have to push him down because of injury and situation. Next guy up is Chase Brown. This is another guy who is rocketing up people's offseason boards. And I'm pouring cold water on it because he really didn't break out until Zach Moss got hurt and went on IR. And then he got the full workload, including all the passing game and all the rushing game work. So he was getting like 20 plus touches a game. And he was scoring a lot, and this was like a high-flying offense, so he was benefiting from all of these things. I expect them to draft a running back or at least bring in a complement. And if that happens, I think, right around running back 20 is very reasonable for him and gives you the upside. But also, you could just, if there's a 2-back system running, he can sit in that spot and be productive as your running back too. Next guy up, Chuba Hubbard. This is the one where I should maybe have him a lot higher. If they don't bring in any competition, he was awesome this year. Jonathan Brooks was expected to come back, but Brooks isn't going to play this coming year, I don't think, at all. And if they don't bring in any competition, Hubbard could just be in for another monster workload, another monster season. Moving him up into that B tier isn't that far-fetched to me. Very productive player. So again, I have him at running back 20. I am much more confident in these 20 running backs than I was in the top 20 last year, right? Like we were sneaking like Zamir White in there trying to find the top 20 running backs. I am very much more confident in the talent of these players, even if the situations are a little bit sticky. So, this is why I say too, you can wait at running back, because if you get somebody like Brees or Kamara at the end of the B tier and then double dip with your next pick and get Chuba Hubbard, like I think you're going to be able to compete very well at running back, and you didn't need to spend crazy draft capital to get it. Next guy, Isiah Pacheco. This is going to be very, very difficult to rank until we get through the draft and until we hear more about his injury, because he obviously had that fibula break and he was not the same. And we saw Tony Pollard suffer the same injury, and he was not the same for like over a year later, or until over a year later. So hopefully we get positive news on his injury, and hopefully they don't bring in a running back. But if they do in round 2 or 3, like if they landed Dylan Sampson, his draft stock is going to plummet for me. I'm probably going to just rank him outside the top 25, maybe outside the top 30 at running back, because unfortunately, he suffered a pretty serious injury for running backs. Next guy on the list is Aaron Jones. He's one of my favorites, as I think you guys know. And he proved he could be very effective in the Minnesota offense. And I think, he caught a lot of passes and, he did quite a bit of work. I mean, I was literally wondering if he was going to be able to carry the workload in terms of rushing, and he exceeded my expectations by a lot. I mean, they gave him a ton of work. They gave him work late in games that they were winning, all kinds of things like that. He was not very good on the goal line. That was something that I was like very upset about. They give it to him on the 1 and he'd lose a yard. And then
he'd fumble.
And it's just like, dude, can we stop with that? So like he finished his RB16. He played every game. He also dealt with an injury. It looked like he was going to miss a Thursday night game, and he didn't end up missing the game, but didn't play a lot. So, there's a little bit more to be desired here, but I also think there's a pretty good group of running backs too. So like I had him 16 last year and he ended up finishing at 16. That was kind of lucky, but I have him pushed down quite a bit even from last year on a player I really like. So I think that gives an idea of how good the running back landscape is. Moving on now to the next player in this tier is David Montgomery, another guy that was very productive, finished his RB18 on the year, but he did that missing 3 games. I mean, 12 touchdowns a year after scoring 13. It just felt like it was almost a guarantee. It was, or not almost a guarantee. It was like 50-50 though, whether or not he was going to score on the opening drive for Detroit. And if he would score on the opening drive, you're like, all right, I got what I needed from David Montgomery. This is perfect. So, you got 30 to touchdown. That's the 9 points, dude. He'll trickle in 2 catches at some point, and he'll get another 30 yards, and that's going to be his 14 points for the day. So I owned him as well. It was a joy to own him. I think I'm going to target him again. He has missed 3 games the past 2 seasons, but overall, he's one of the safest players, I think, at the position. And again, another reason why I'm not in a rush to draft multiple running backs early. I definitely will wait and try to get my second from this C tier. Next guy up is James Conner. You see him. He actually played 16 of 17 games, and he finished as running back 10. I think that was like our core analysis last year, is that when he plays, he is a top 10 running back, and he played every game and he was a top 10 running back, or almost every game, and he was a top 10 running back. So, 1,108 is nothing like super special or anything, but enough passing game work, and the offense really does run through him on the ground. So maybe they try and get Trey Benson a little bit more involved this year, but I would expect James Conner to have a very stable and steady role as long as he's healthy. Last guy in this tier is Tyrone Tracy. So I like Tracy quite a bit. He didn't take over until the second half of the year, until like week 7 or 8 it was. But he was really productive after that. He had a lot of big time runs. It felt like he'd had multiple 10-yard runs every single game, and he is a converted wide receiver, so he was a pretty good pass catcher too. They didn't use him that way entirely all the time, but I think if they bring in a quarterback that's not mobile and stabilizes the offense, that he could be a pretty big weapon for them out of the backfield, get a little bit more consistent passing game work this coming year. So I have him ranked this low right now because I'm worried that they bring in competition. But if they don't bring in anybody that's any sort of sizable competition to run next to him, I'm going to push him up quite a bit. I think I'm going to, as much as I like Aaron Jones, I think I'd move him over Aaron Jones, over Isiah Pacheco, maybe right next to Chuba Hubbard. So I have quite a bit of faith that he's a good player. And so I'm going to bet on the talent and hope that the quarterback situation in the offense under Dable improves next year.
I like this tier a lot. I'm looking at this tier. I'm licking my chops. I'm ready to draft Kenneth Walker alongside Chuba Hubbard with David Montgomery and James Conner. So that's how I'm going to build a lot of my teams this year. I'm excited to be mock drafting with you once Sleeper's fully updated post-draft. But, with those guys, like you mentioned with Connor, he's top 10 when he's on the field. With Kenneth Walker, like, yeah, he's got Charbonnet, like, nipping at his heels. But we've seen when Walker plays, like, Charbonnet goes back to the bench for the most part. It's not like he has this explosive game and then he's at a 55% snap share. It's like, that's just kind of what it is. And I think this team, like, yes, there will be room for Charbonnet to get more touches just because they're going to be more run heavy this year, but that's also going to be more for Walker too. And with Hubbard, maybe they'll bring in somebody in the draft, but I wouldn't expect that to be anywhere in the first 2 days whatsoever, just because they still have Brooks for 2026. So this is definitely for you, zero RB boys. This is the tier.
Yeah, and I'm very much in on this tier. So if you can go 0 RB and get somebody here, like, I'm not even sure that's 0 RB. I just feel like you're just taking advantage of how deep running back is, and you're going to get somebody you like. And so, I think that draft strategy is very good. So, all right, getting down into the D tier. This is a group of guys that used to be better and have some question marks here. So we got Brian Robinson Jr. He was off to a really hot start to start the year, and then he kind of just faded, and he was banged up, and he was trying to play through it, and then he'd miss a game, and then he'd try and play through it, and then he got his hamstring hurt. So I think his season was just kind of derailed, even though he only missed 3 games. He was playing hurt the second half of the year, and just couldn't get it done, and Eckler was becoming more part of the offense, and obviously Jaden Daniels was going nuts out of the backfield. So I'm a little hesitant here going into this year. I don't know that this is somebody that I am going to be actively targeting. I know he's solid. I just have this weird thing where, like, if he doesn't score, I don't know how much receiving game work he's going to get, and I don't know that he has a big time ceiling. So that's my feeling on Robinson and why I have him down in the D tier. Next guy up is Najee Harris, who just signed with our Chargers. And so I'm pretty happy about the signing. I think he's going to be good between the tackles. They're looking to build the line. He's in a Harbaugh system. It's going to be good for him, I think, and you see that he's never finished worse than RB20, and I have him buried at RB26 here. So I might have to consider moving him up. He doesn't miss games. He's going to play every single game. They should have a lot of scoring opportunities. I'm just not sure what a running back mate is going to look like. I'm guessing they're going to have a second guy if they re-sign J.K. Dobbins. That's who was their lead guy last year. So I don't know if he's going to see less volume, or if they draft somebody in the second or third round that's going to be getting some decent volume as well. And I'm just not sure. So I have him ranked lower for now and could move him up, reserve the right to move him up from here. Next guy is Tony Pollard. He felt like he was better last year than the numbers ended up showing. I feel like he got off to a hot start, was pretty good. And we had a buddy in our league who had him, who just didn't feel like his team was very good, but Tony Pollard seemed to be like doing really well for him in his flex spot. So it was like, maybe I just had a feeling that he was like better for some reason, but finished as RB21, 180 points, and he played all the games but one. So I'm just not sure that he's really has that much upside. I think, he's a solid player. If you get him as your RB2, I'd be fine with that. But I definitely prefer him as a 3 or even a 4 if you can make that work. And I think he's going to end up being, back kind of where he was drafted last year in the 9th, 10th round, something like that in your Superflex 10-team leagues. 2 more guys in this tier. This one's Ramondre Stevenson. I just want Ramondre to be so much better than he's been. I owned him in that 2022 season when he was really good, and it was like, dude, I get to just plug in Ramondre. I picked him in like the 11th round. This is awesome. He's going to be great. He had 88 targets. It was like all going well. And then everything is just falling apart since then. He got hurt, and then the offense was obviously terrible last year. So unfortunately, that didn't really work out that well for him. And then the last guy in this tier that we're going to talk about here is Travis Etienne. So he went from being the 3rd best running back in fantasy to not even playable, which is wild to think because Tank Bigsby kind of took over. He didn't get enough passing game work, and so I don't even really know what to make of Travis Etienne. We put him here. We have some hope because we were talking about it, and Liam Coen's going there, so maybe he kind of is able to restore Etienne's value and push him up, and maybe get some good reports, and he ends up in the next tier up from here. But overall, I just am very scared of this offense in general and of Etienne because he just wasn't even playable. He was not good this year, and he wrecked a lot of fantasy teams this year, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think with this tier, I guess starting with Najee, I would expect the Chargers to add someone that's a little bit more of a speed back. I think when you've got Najee that's not going to miss games, more of a thumper, we know what he is. And same with Ramondre too. Like I know I had talked about Jeanty maybe going there, which would obviously crater Ramondre's value, but I think we could be looking at like round 2, maybe like a Trevion Henderson. Um, I think would be a really good fit. So there's a lot of things that can go against Ramondre here, whereas I think Najee's only going to continue to rise. And I think with Etienne, like I'm kind of cautiously optimistic about Etienne. I find myself like later in best ball drafts just sort of taking him just because we know he has talent. We've seen him finish top 3. We know the new offensive system's coming in. There's really no weapons on this team right now other than Brian Thomas Jr., obviously. And with how Etienne works as a pass catcher, I think there's opportunity to kind of use him in a Rashad White plus type role in this system. So I think I'd be okay taking him as kind of a flyer, maybe as my 4th running back, and just see if you can hit on a lotto ticket.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. As a 4th running back, it's worth checking in, right? I mean, he did just show 1 year ago that he could be very good. So overall, I think he could be a solid pick. I don't think he's going to land here. I think he's going to end up getting pushed up the board as we get better news from the offense and from him in particular through the offseason. All right, and then this last tier here has guys that we got a couple rookies and a guy that has question mark, right? So these are just like kind of throwing out here to have discussion points. The first guy is Javonte Williams. So he just signed with Dallas. It was a very small deal, less than $4 million, but if he's going to be the main running back there, if they don't bring in anybody major to compete with him or to, take over the lead role, this could be something where he's very valuable. I loved him going into 2022. I thought he had a ton of talent. That major knee injury, unfortunately, kind of derailed his explosiveness, but he showed that he could be a solid pass catcher, and Dak has shown that he's willing to use the running back in the passing game. So if he is going to be the starter, if that's going to be the plan for Dallas, I think he could have some value, and he's going to push into one of these tiers above here. The next guy on here is a rookie, Quinshon Judkins. He did a ton of favors for himself in the combine. He ran way faster than he was expected, 4.48, and he came in as just a monster. I mean, he ran that at 221. And so, he was obviously amazing at Ohio State, but I do think that there's a chance here that Judkins can sneak his way into like the RB3 in the class, maybe early in the 2nd round. And if that's the case, whatever team he goes to, maybe the Browns, he's going to be the lead back there and could end up really, really elevating his draft stock from a fantasy perspective. The next guy is Caleb Johnson. Again, he's a very good player. I do think he's the 3rd best running back in the class. That's just my take. I don't know where exactly he's going to get drafted. I've seen him as early as the early 2nd. I've seen him as late as the end of the 3rd, as like RB6 or 7 in the class. So there seems to be some disparity in thought on him amongst NFL evaluators. So I think his draft stock is going to matter a lot for where he ends up landing on this tier list for fantasy value. And the last guy in this tier is Trevion Henderson. So there's been a lot of comparisons to like Alvin Kamara because he's got the receiving thing going on here. He was Quinshon Judkins' teammate in college at Ohio State. So again, this was somebody that you were like compared to Bijan, when they were both in college. And I think he's kind of fallen from grace because of injuries. But he's somebody that a team could just take a shot on in the 2nd round and turn the keys over to him in the backfield. And then he's going to see his draft stock rocket up too, because he does have such high passing game ability. Yeah,
I think with Cleveland, Judkins would be a really good fit. And I want to see Caleb Johnson go to the Broncos in the 3rd round. If he does fall to the 3rd round, I think that would be a steal, and I think that would be perfect. With Henderson, I don't think anyone's really projecting him to be a workhorse, but as a Chargers fan, I would love for him to go there. But maybe from fantasy, splitting the load wouldn't be so fun, but I think he'd be a really good combination to Najee there.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we've seen two running backs work in multiple different systems, so I think
Yeah.
Harbaugh can make that work. And Henderson could be in a situation where he's not super. If he goes to the Chargers, he's not super useful early in the year, but he takes over as the more fantasy relevant running back from Najee Harris. That would be something where if Henderson did go to the Chargers, I'm not moving Najee Harris up much from here, right? It would be Henderson that would be the desired running back for fantasy purposes for the Chargers there. But after the draft, we're going to redo these and we're going to have these guys all kind of placed and have an idea of where we want them. So
after Jeanty falls to the Falcons and they take him,
and then we have to move Bijan down. Yeah,
chaos ensues. Could you imagine?
Oh my gosh, that would be so bad. But
nothing ever goes as chalk. The only the only first round running back pick that I can remember where everyone was mocking there and then he went there was Najee Harris. Other than that, it's just.
Well, I can remember a couple others, right? I mean, Ezekiel Elliott, when he came out, that was mocked to the,
that's true.
To Dallas.
He went like 4 overall, right?
He went 4th overall. The other one was Trent Richardson. He went 2nd overall.
Oh, God.
Remember that? Yeah. So
I remember Trent Richardson.
Yeah. So he was definitely consensus up there too. Another one that was consensus up there that I was very sure was going to go in the top 4 was Leonard Fournette. When he got picked by the Jaguars, he was pretty consensus up there too. So these early first round picks are consensus, but like even Jeanty's not, right? There's been like, maybe he makes it to 12, maybe he makes it to 20. So I don't know exactly where Jeanty's going to go. I agree with you that he is a lot less predictable than some of these other players that we've seen at the running back position too.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, hope you guys enjoyed the rankings video. We'll have more of these out. We're going to be starting a mock draft again here soon, and we look forward to talking to you the next one.
Later.